I grew up believing in evolution. As a matter of fact, keep in mind, some people think that you're ignorant if you believe in creation. I was a high school dropout believing in evolution. The more educated I became, I have a doctorate now, I believe in creation. So actually, the reverse is true. Don't believe that myth that it's only ignorant people. It's the ignorant people that listen to the biased doctors and scientists that cling to this view that are being deceived. And I know that what I'm saying is very volatile, and you may have some passionate views on this, and you may disagree with me, but I'm still going to share what I believe. I'm going to give you about a dozen reasons why I believe that creation is really the logical thing to believe. It is the logical truth. We have to look at the evidence. We have to look at what's going on in the world and then play those things out and come to our various conclusions. For one thing, first reason I'd like to offer for you is we are surrounded by evidence of intelligence and design. So reason number one would be intelligent design. Evolutionists believe in spontaneous generation, that single cells of life began on their own in warm puddles without a designer, and even though they've got the capacity built in to eat, to eliminate waste, to reproduce, and to propel themselves, keep in mind what was going on in the world when evolution first took off and went into orbit. A number of things that you need to consider. Louis Pasteur was making some progress with very primitive microscopes. When they looked at a cell, they called it a simple cell. Have you ever heard that phrase before? A simple cell. Now we have microscopes that are 1,000 times more powerful than the very simple microscopes that they had back in Darwin's day. And we know that a single cell of life, listen carefully, picture New York City during rush hour. Think for a minute in your mind, get this picture of all of the communications, the wires going through the buildings, the cell phones, the irrigation, the plumbing, the electronics, the taxis, the subways, the people, the elevators. Think of all the transistors that make New York happen. Think of the complexity of life of New York City at rush hour. Now here's what one modern doctor says after examining what's going on in one cell of life. One simple cell of life we now know is more complex than New York City at rush hour. What are the chances of that happening by accident? You know, this has been put forth many ways. Some have said the idea of life happening spontaneously, and ultimately they call it the Big Bang. All different variations of the Big Bang, but the idea is that at one point something exploded in these galaxies, and they say it all came from matter that may have been compressed smaller than the head of a pin, and it exploded and expanded, it continued to expand, and all these different gases and forces went spiraling out, forming the different universes or the galaxies and solar systems. And the idea of the interworking systems and organization and design coming from explosions is so absurd. Someone compared it to dropping a bomb in a pile of logs and getting a log cabin. What are the odds of that? What are the odds of giving a monkey a typewriter? How long would it take him to produce an Encyclopedia Britannica? Can you throw a bomb in a junkyard and get a Boeing 747 or the space station? It's just as plausible to believe in evolution, that the organization and the intricate design that you've got in a single cell of life, not to mention the human body, could happen by something exploding. Now, to some extent, I believe in the Big Bang. I think that God said it and bang, it happened. The Word of God can't produce things, but there may not have been a bang. The other issue would be, point number 2, the complexity of life. Someone said that in Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe's walking down the beach and he saw footprints one day and they weren't his feet. And just those footprints in the sand told him, I'm not alone. There's someone else on the island. Was he right? Is that a logical deduction? Very simple. Footprints in the sand. Can we see the footprints of God in our world? I went riding this last week with my boys and some friends way back in these remote mountains, and we went across mountaintops. And it was quite a sight to see, because the only time I could ever call Karen is I had to ride to the top of a 7,000-foot mountain. And I had no cell phone reception, and my friend said, some of you remember Rob Casebolt, he said, hold it over your head. I'm on top of a 7,000-foot mountain. He said, hold it over your head, it might help. So we had been praying on the way up it would work. So I held my phone over my head, and it worked. I got a signal. So we made all our calls standing on top of our ATVs on top of a mountain. But while riding across these mountains, we came across a few places where 3 or 4 stones were piled up on top of the mountain. We looked at those 3 or 4 rocks, and we thought, someone has been here before us. There is a sign of organization and design that could not happen by itself. If we could figure that out, and these are rocks sitting on a mountaintop, that took intelligence, how much more intelligence would it require for all of the organization and the design and the symmetry that you see in the world today? Pardon me, but the idea of it happening spontaneously is absurd. Let me give you, how many of you have heard the illustration about the mouse trap? Now I can't see your hands, but I think there must be some out there. How many of you heard the mouse trap? This is not a mouse trap. I wanted to be different, so I asked Bonnie to find me an egg beater. I don't know where she got this. Do they still make these? Yeah, they do still make them. If you looked at something like this, would you immediately assume that an intelligence produced it? How many would agree? Could you throw bombs at rock for years and never get one of these? No. Hand grenades, it didn't matter. No matter how you arrange the bombs, would they ever produce one of these? No. This required intelligence. The interesting thing about this is it's a combination of 3 or 4 things. You've got a handle, you've got a crank that manipulates the gears to the shafts and the little blenders. I used to use one of these to comb my brother's hair when I was growing up. Now, if you take the handle by itself, does it serve a purpose? If you take the crank and the gears and set it off, if we disassemble this, which would take some work in itself, if you disassemble this and you put the gears off by themselves, would it serve any purpose? What about the blenders? If they're separated by themselves, you could probably still whip eggs, but it wouldn't do what it does when it's combined. This would never evolve, because in order for it to be what it is, all the pieces have to come together at the same time. The handle would never say, you know, I think I'd be more fulfilled if I had blenders attached to me and develop blenders. If you try to crank the crank without the handle, you get this action. It's like a helicopter without the rotor. It needs all of the different components to work. I don't know if I'm making myself clear. There are millions of examples in nature and creation of things infinitely more complex than a mousetrap or an egg beater that would never evolve, because in order for them to serve their purpose, they would all have to have this need to be together all at one time. You remove any component, it ceases to work. Does that make sense? The cells of life, matter of fact, probably this is a good place to lead into point number 3, symbiotic relationships. We are surrounded in nature with what we would call symbiotic relationships. Insects and flowers. There are many flowers that will not pollinate unless they are pollinated by the proboscis that comes out of the nose of the butterfly. And if you go to the rainforest, there are some orchids that have a funnel that is a foot deep, and there is a moth that just so happens to have a proboscis that unwinds that far, and he only pollinates that orchid. What are the chances of an orchid surviving for millions of years, not being able to be pollinated until a moth happens to develop the ability to pollinate that orchid? They would have to happen simultaneously. The food in your stomach is being digested because we have a symbiotic relationship with certain microbes and bacteria. They're called friendly bacteria. Are you aware of that? And that's why sometimes if you've been sick and you taking antibiotics, they tell you you ought to eat some yogurt. You know what you're doing? You're reintroducing some of those friendly bacteria, a culture where they can grow, to bring your digestion back where it's supposed to be. The relationship between bees and the flowers. And there are relationships between sea anemones and clownfish. And the little clownfish are immune to the poisonous touch of the anemones. And they keep the anemones clean, and vice versa. They scrub each other. And there are fish that open their mouth and other fish go inside. And there are birds that clean the ticks off the backs of rhinoceroses. And all throughout nature, there are fungus and trees that have these relationships that would only exist if they developed simultaneously. It could never have evolved that way. Then, of course, you've got something that's called the law of entropy. Evolution operates on the basis that things are getting better. But now I didn't say the theory of entropy. It's the law of entropy, which is the inevitable and steady deterioration of a system or society from order to disorder. Everything we observe in the world today, anything left to itself without outside energy being put into it, without intelligence being added to it, it falls apart. If you see a beautifully landscaped yard in gardens and flowers, and the owner of the house dies and it is not kept, what happens? It goes to weed, and the grass starts to grow, and the paint begins to peel, and it all begins to implode over time. And that is a very simple fact that can be seen all through nature. Anything left to itself will begin to deteriorate, to work its way down. Evolution is teaching the exact opposite of what we scientifically observe in the universe. The orbit of the moon around the earth is slowing. It's not speeding up. Matter of fact, it's slowly spiraling further out from the earth every year. And I forget what it is. It's in 1,000 years, it's 800 feet or something like that. It gets further out. And you know, that works in the scenario of the earth being young, 6,000 years old. You can have the moon going out every 1,000 years, 800 feet, and still be in its orbit. But based on that scenario and those measurements, if the earth has been here for billions of years, the moon would have been rubbing against the earth based on that spiral. And just everything we see in the galaxies around us and what they call the expanding universe, things are not getting better, they're breaking down. They were started by the Lord during creation, but evolution is teaching that things are somehow spiraling up and getting better. Then you've got what we would call the flood of evidence. When you look around the world, and I saw it again just last week, this is one of the reasons that made me think of it. We drove by Pyramid Lake, which is over there in Nevada, and you could see where at one time on the strata in the hillsides surrounding the lake, there are lines. You could take a level with a transit, put it in the ground, and you could follow that line on the hillsides. It would be perfectly level. You know why? Because water always levels itself in our world. The water had been at a much higher level at one time. And I have been in New Mexico and seen places where you're 8,000 feet up in the mountains, and there's seashells everywhere as far as you could see. You could just dig them out of the hills. The dinosaur bones and the bones and the fossils that we find around the world. You know how you get the multitude of fossils that you find around the world? There had to be some cataclysm that caused a tremendous flood, because the way you get fossils is all this mud and silt covers something quickly, and it dies and it is pressed down and it leaves the impression. You don't get fossils when something dies and lays on the surface of the ground and blows away. It must be covered. Otherwise, if a person dies or an animal dies and it lays on the surface of the earth, insects, decomposition, animals of carrion, they break it apart and they carry it off, and you don't get a fossil. It must be covered quickly by mud. For years, the scientists tried to say, well, how did the evolutionary scientists, how did the dinosaurs die off? And they had all these theories of disease, changes in the atmosphere. And finally, they had to come to the conclusion, you know, we found all these fossils in great heaps together, covered with silt. They obviously died in some cataclysmic flood. They could not deny it any longer. The evidence was so overwhelming. So you know what they said? Instead of saying, well, maybe there was a worldwide flood like the Bible says, they said, an asteroid must have hit the earth and caused a flood and buried all the dinosaurs. Have you heard this before? They're trying to find a way to get around the Bible account and still account for the fact that there's obviously been a global flood. Everywhere you look in the world is the evidence. Everywhere I've been in the world, I've seen the evidence firsthand with my own eyes. One of the things that turned me from being an evolutionist to a creationist was when I was living in this canyon in Southern California. And I could see evidence of high water, and this is an 11,000-foot mountain. I could see evidence of high water way up in those mountains, and I thought, I was reading the Bible at the same time, that there really was a global flood. Now, I was one of those people who first tried to take my evolutionary beliefs and mix them with the Bible, and I said, well, those 7 days of creation really were probably ages. Now, have you run into Christians that believe that? They try to they don't want to be embarrassed because evolutionists love to scowl and look down upon people who believe in creation as though they're ignorant. Don't be intimidated by that. You have nothing to be ashamed of. The lack of evidence is on the side of the evolutionists. They have the burden of proof. You cannot show from scientific observation an example of organization and design and interworking systems coming from chaos anywhere that is observable in the universe. You cannot, and this is for me a slam dunk, if they believe that life began spontaneously without any intelligent input or assistance, then why can't any of the scientists or evolutionists anywhere in the world produce one single example of a cell of life being produced by a scientist? Can we manipulate life? Oh yeah, we can do in vitro, and we can do test tubes, and we can do all kinds of things where we take the life that God has made and manipulate it. But can we produce a single cell of life no matter what kind of laboratory environment we create? They have not been able to do it once, and yet they say it happened all over the world. Really? That's not very scientific. If it's scientific, show me. Now, can I show you where God created? No. But I can prove that you don't get intelligent systems and order and design from chaos. That is something. If you look at a car, one thing you know is somewhere there's a car maker. Am I right? And there have been many evolutionists who have been overwhelmed by the evidence. They look at a painting, they know there's an artist. They look at the book, they know there's an author. You cannot have intelligent or creation and design without intelligence cooperating with that. Then, of course, you've got the living fossils that are an embarrassment. I did an amazing fact about this a little while ago. For years, they had these fossils of these fish that are called coelacanths. You've got one of them there on the screen. They were believed to be extinct. 65 million years was the date they put on the fossil. 65 million years. That's a long time. And that's in writing. 1938, someone fished one up near Indonesia. And I've got pictures there of someone swimming with a living example of a coelacanth. They are very rare. You only find them in the oceans around Indonesia. And they used to say they were proof for how the fish walked out on land. They said, this is one of the missing links. The coelacanth, those are called proto-legs. You can see the fins? They said those are proto-legs. They're developing feet. Well, 65 million years later, they're still swimming with them just the same way. They never did learn how to walk. Matter of fact, they're in very deep oceans and they have no desire to walk. You try to get them to walk and they die. So it's a desperate attempt to believe something. Then you've got the horseshoe crab. And horseshoe crab, they say, is a living fossil because they find fossils and they say that they are, 150 million years old, and yet the fossils which you see on the screen, and a living one. I used to live on the Atlantic seaboard. You can see them. They all swarm up on the beach. How many of you have seen horseshoe crabs? Lived on the East Coast. They swarm up. They're a real menace, too. Kind of creepy when they crawl. They fall over on their back. But the fossils they've got that they said are 150 million years old are identical to the modern ones. And it is a real mystery why horseshoe crabs have what they call a primitive eye. How come it didn't get any more advanced if evolution is true? Why did they stop right at horseshoe crab? And a number of other examples. People will say the sharks are one of the most, they're living fossils because they've remained virtually unchanged for so many years. And the, what else? The alligator is a living fossil. And of course the clams have not changed in millions of years because they're found in all different strata. Let me share something with you that evolutionists don't want you to know. During the global flood, when creatures die, different kinds of creatures, reptiles, mammals, amphibians, bodies have different gases and density. They will sink and float at different times. In other words, suppose that you were to take a dozen lizards and a dozen mice, throw them in an aquarium, drown them all, observe them, you'll see that the lizards will sink first, days before the mice bloat and float to the top. The lizards will sink first. They will get covered by sediment first. The reason the dinosaurs are found deeper, at deeper levels, is because they were reptiles, they sank, they were covered by silt sooner than the mammals that floated. They are found at different levels. It is something that is observable scientifically today. But they say that these fossils are millions of years old. You know how they date many of the fossils? Listen carefully. I'm getting ahead of myself. They date the fossils based on the strata of Earth where they find them. If they're deeper, they're older. Do you know how they date the strata of Earth, the layers of Earth? Based on the fossils. Are you listening carefully? You ask them, so how do we date these strata? Well, it's based on the fossils that we found there. So how do we date the fossils? Based on the strata where we find them. It's circular reasoning. Talk about a desperate effort to try to prove something that isn't true. Now, here is where a lot of people get confused. Do I believe in evolution? Yes. I believe in microevolution. Let me explain. In the articles that you'll find in National Geographic, especially in that one where they talked about was Darwin right, they talk about where Darwin went to the Galapagos Islands and he found all these different varieties of finches, and that must be proof of evolution. Well, that's called microevolution. Microevolution is very different from macroevolution. Let me see if I can read a definition for you here. Microevolution refers to varieties within a given type. Change happens within a group, but the descendant is clearly the same type as the ancestors. This might be better called variation or adaptation, but the changes are horizontal in effect, not vertical. Now, how many of you would agree that the skeletons that you will find of dogs could be vastly different based on whether or not it is a Great Dane or a Chihuahua? In that article about dogs, it traces all of the dogs back to two original dogs that were wolves or wolf-like. Well, that's what the Bible says. Noah didn't need to have two dachshunds and two chihuahuas and two poodles and two of all those dogs on the ark. The DNA of all the dogs in the world can be traced back to common ancestors that were probably very much wolf-like. That's why the wild dogs, the dingoes that you find in Australia, and then you've got the coyotes in North America, and almost in Africa, you've got the African dogs. Every continent has its wild dog, but they share the same DNA. Now, why do I take so much time to talk about this? You would see vast differences in the skeletons among those dogs. What about, now go to the slide about people. Do we see differences in people on the earth? Does that mean that we've evolved from different creatures? Or in the DNA of Adam and Eve was all the variety that you see sitting around you right now? I'm going to say something that is very volatile, but it's truth. You want to hear it? When was the theory of evolution developed and taking off? What time in history, roughly? 1844. He took his voyage on the Beagle and began to write his thesis. Was slavery an issue in the world back then? Are you aware that one of the arguments in favor of slavery were people saying that some people are not as human as others, that they haven't evolved as far as others? And it is beyond me how any African American could embrace evolution, because really it was forged in the bowels of trying to prove that some humans were more highly developed than others. That was the context of what was happening. Why did Adolf Hitler want to kill all the Jews and certain people? Didn't he believe in the Aryan race was more highly developed and superior to others? You see what I'm saying? Embracing evolution is really embracing the idea of survival of the fittest. It's embracing racism. It's embracing euthanasia, and it's okay to kill those who are inferior, because what happens in the animal world? It's survival of the most superior species. You take it to its ultimate extreme, and that's where you're going to land. Missing links. I've got news for you. They're still missing. Oh, but Pastor Doug, how many times have we seen on TV or read articles about how they've found these missing links? Let me give you a classic example of what they find. Here's a Time magazine a few years ago where how man began. Now, what you've got there on the cover is a picture that is Exhibit A of what happens. They will find particles of a skull somewhere in Africa, no other bones. They won't find complete skeletons. They'll find particles of a skull, and a very ambitious evolutionist, who, by the way, is being funded in order to find things. If he stops finding things, he loses his funding or her funding. You listening? They are extremely motivated to talk to their benefactors and say, you'll never guess what we found. We found a missing link. They will find a little piece of bone here, a bone here, a tooth here, and they will then take a lot of plaster of Paris, which you can see in the gray, and they say, see, when we fill in the gaps, this is what it looked like. Now, first of all, let's just suppose that they are accurate, but it looks like they took a lot of liberties there trying to make it look ape-like. Let's just suppose. I just showed you all the diversity of skeletons you can find among dogs, and you know what? They're all dogs, right? How much diversity do we find among skeletons of human? I won't ask you to look at the skull of the person next to you, but I'd venture to say that we got a lot of different looking skulls, and as you go around the world, they made a big deal about saying down in the Philippines they found this new race of prehistoric missing links because they're only about 3 feet tall. And that's their argument. Do we have races of people in the world today that are 4 feet tall? Called pygmies. That doesn't mean that they're the missing links. You've got genetic diversity of humans all over the world. They have never yet found a complete skeleton of anybody that is half ape and half human. What you will find as you go to the museums is a lot of very creative artwork. Sculptors will sculpt what they think Mr. Missing Link looked like, and Mrs. Link and all the little missing links, and they'll paint their pictures and they'll say, here's how they spent their day, and this is what, and they'll recreate it. But they don't have them. Not only do they not have the missing link for us to monkey, but they don't have the missing link between the alligator and the rats, and between the bats and the birds, and they're missing them. The transitionary species between the different kinds are all absent. I'm just pausing here because I want that to sink in. And yet people believe that, the excuse, the argument that is offered by evolutionists for that is they said there were leaps. All of a sudden things change very quickly, and there's a spontaneous great generation of change, and that's why we don't find, because when it transitioned from alligator to moose, it did it very quickly. And so there are very few skeletons around. And the reason that they apply the millions and billions of years for these things happening is because they know that you can't observe any case of it in modern history. And so they say, well, because it happens so slowly, we can't observe it. It's like staring at a big clock. You may not see the hands move if it's moving so slowly. You see what I'm saying? But, Doug, you have to admit, there are similarities among the species. And you've probably heard, do you know that we share 98% or 97% of the same DNA as chimpanzees? We share some DNA with all mammals. It doesn't mean that you're a marsupial or a skunk. There are very high percentages of certain things we hold in common. Because there are similarities among species does not prove evolution. Let me illustrate that. I've got a picture here on the screen. I've got a new pickup truck and a car and a motorcycle. Are there similarities between the car and the pickup and the motorcycle? Let's talk about it for a second. Do they all have some lighting system? Do they have inflated tires? Do they have electrical systems? Do they have motors that use oil and gas and exhaust systems? They've got propulsion systems. They've got tail lights. speedometers. There's a lot of things. They got braking systems. Thank you. A lot of similarities. Okay. One is a Kawasaki made in Japan. One is a Ford made in Michigan, I suppose, and one is a GMC or Dodge, I forget. All made at different factories. Because they have things in common does not mean one came from the other. The motorcycle did not evolve into the car, which then evolved into the truck. Why do they have so many things in common? Because they operate in the same environment. Why do many creatures in this world have so many things in common? Because we live in the same environment where there is water and certain gases. We need to propel ourselves. We need eyes to see in order to know where to propel ourselves. Because we live in the same environment, there's certain similarities. That doesn't mean one came from another. That means that the designer realized there needs to be certain things in common. That's what they say at the factory where they make the motorcycles, the cars, and the trucks. We need to design them with these certain things because they have to operate within these parameters. That's why there's similarity in species. It is really ridiculous reasoning to say because there are similarities between your hand and the hand of a raccoon means that you used to live in a tree. But that's the logic that's being used. We're privileged in this church to have a number of doctors, physicians, even some scientists, teachers, and I'm calling on Dr. Steve and Michelle Friend because there are two doctors. Come on up here for a second. Medical doctor?
Yes.
MD?
Yes.
Veterinarian?
Yes.
You both went to school?
Yes.
Did you take some education from even some secular schools? They taught evolution in those places? Do you believe in evolution?
No.
Do we have a microphone? No. Here we go. Thank you, Vicki. Did you take some zoology classes, Michelle?
Yes.
You did. And do you believe in creation or evolution?
Creation.
Is it because your church mandates it or it seems logical based on your studies?
No, it seems logical.
Based on your studies. Dr. Steve? All right. You've also probably been exposed to both teachings.
Mm-hmm.
And do you believe in evolution or creation?
Before your presentation, evolution.
We're glad we're making progress. Oh, thanks.
Definitely creation.
Is it because it's a church teaching that's mandated and you feel obligated and the Bible teaches it? Or is it your reasoning?
It's my reasoning, and after taking gross anatomy and dissecting the human body, there's just no other way to tell. You know, it's definitely creationism.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Can you say thank you, Dr. Steve, Michelle? I did that deliberately because there's an assumption that, well, it's only uneducated religious zealots, people who are really involved in the medical field or the biological or zoology or studying animals, they know. That's a lie. It's a myth. There are tens and thousands of scientists. Some of them are not even Christians, but they still believe in creation. I was talking to somebody this weekend, does not go to church, does not practice any religion, but if you were to ask him, do you believe in creation or evolution, he'll say, it's got to be creation. Only an idiot would believe in evolution because and I don't mean to be, forgive me, I'm not trying to be derogatory, but this is what he said. There is no logical reason that you can embrace the organization and the interworking systems that we see in the universe and in the human body. If we look at a car and know that this means that somewhere there's a car maker, how much more complex is a human body than a car? How many of you would agree that it is absurd to look at an automobile and say, it oozed up out of the oil over millions of years? Because it's got the ignition system and the propulsion system and the braking system and the electronics and the cooling system, all these systems that operate with design, you know, there's intelligence there. What is more complex, a car or a human? Matter of fact, when you read the Genesis account, it seems clear that God made the creatures in order of their complexity. He starts out beginning with the land, the environment in which the creatures are going to operate. He makes the air and he makes the land. And then he ends up making separates them, and the water from the land. Then he makes the vegetation. And some people say that, it was over millions of years that God these days are really millions of years. Well, he makes the vegetation on the third day. He doesn't make the sun until the fourth day. How's the vegetation going to live for millions of years without a sun? Well, Doug, if there's no sun, then where was the light when God said, let there be light? God is light. When he came to this chaotic orb, he said, let there be light. He was the source of light. He began to spin the planet. That separated day from night. That's not a problem. I believe when it says he made the sun the fourth day, he did it the fourth day. You know why? He doesn't want his worship in the sun. The vegetation could live by the light of God. Anyway, so things got more complex, and then he makes the creatures of the air and the creatures of the water, and then he makes the land creatures, and then he makes man, and finally he makes the most complex creature, which is a woman. Right? That's the danger of using both sides of your brain. Just complex. Now, I started talking about the dating dilemma. Let me read something. Everyone said, well, they know because they use, carbon-14 radioisotope dating. Let me read something to you from Compton's Encyclopedia. The whole foundation, a wise man builds his house on a rock. The foundation of evolution is built on the dating information, their dating system. If the dating system crumbles, the whole house falls. The foundation is this carbon-14 radioisotope dating. I am reading to you verbatim from Compton's Encyclopedia. Listen very carefully. Carbon-14 is produced in the Earth's atmosphere when nitrogen-14 or N14 interacts with the cosmic rays. Scientists believe that cosmic rays have been bombarding the atmosphere ever since the Earth was formed, while the amount of nitrogen in the atmosphere has remained constant. They believe it was constant. They don't know. Consequently, C14 formation is thought to occur at a constant rate. It's thought to, although the current ratio of C14 to other carbon atoms in the atmosphere is known, currently it is known, scientists are not certain that this ratio has been constant. Errors in radiocarbon dating can be caused by inaccurate radiation or particle counts, contamination of a sample with more modern carbon, and stray radiation striking the counter. Using relative dating methods, scientists are able to distinguish which events came before others, but usually cannot pinpoint precisely when the events occurred. If they're saying anything in here, they're saying it is unreliable. Now, suppose that you were to see a candle burning in a room. I open a door and you walk in the room and I say, here's a candle burning. You work with the CIA, FBI, and I say, you need to tell me how long has that candle been burning? Well, what can you do? Let's use science. You can say, let's measure how fast it's burning now. How much candle is burnt? Look at a watch and say how long the candle is burning. You can measure the rate of burn, can't you? Yeah, you can measure the rate of burn. But you have to know how tall was the candle when it started. Am I right? Do you know that yet? Well, you can try and measure the amount of wax that is left at the base of the candle and measure how much wax is being consumed and offset it and get an idea how much was there. To begin with, you might be able to guess like that. But you don't know what the shape of the candle was. Was it the same shape all the way up, or maybe it went wider as it went up, may have gone narrower, right? Or, are you aware that when you opened the door and entered that room, that the air content in that room changed and the candle can burn now at a different speed than it did before you opened the door? Was the earth once radically different before the flood? Was the vegetation much deeper? Fossil record, if it says anything, says that the atmosphere around the world used to be a lot more tranquil. There are ferns, lush ferns and coal beds. Saudi Arabia is a desert today. All that oil underneath there, where do you think that comes from? That comes from copious amounts of vegetation that was very quickly covered and compressed and formed these oil deposits and coal deposits that used to be peat moss. They know that. They know the planet used to be a virtual garden that went through some cataclysm that quickly covered this vegetation and formed a lot of the fuel reserves that we're living on today. But the dating method doesn't work because the atmosphere changed. And so the foundation that we're using is inaccurate. I was talking with Ron Ritterskamp, who teaches at our school, specializes in this area, and listening to some doctors' tapes, Kent Hovind and others. They pulled a woolly mammoth out of the hole up in Siberia. They decided to get an accurate dating method. They sent one end of the mammoth to one laboratory and another end to another laboratory. One end dated it 10,000 years, the other one 20,000 years. Different ends of the same mammoth. 100% error. You realize that? That's what that represents. They take clams out of the ocean today, wait 1 year and date them, they'll date 1,000 years. It's affected by, also, do you know if you take an object and you cover it with a saline solution for a year and then date it, it will date much older. You listening? Cover it with a saline solution. Was the whole world covered with a flood? Would that affect all the fossils that were influenced by the flood? Isn't salt water a saline solution? It throws the whole dating system out the window. It is very, very inaccurate. I'm going to have to rush along because I'm almost out of time here. Another thing that I think is important, another point, 11, is the history of history. If man has evolved slowly over millions of years and just began to kind of drag his knuckles and walk upright, 250,000 years ago, and then he learned to kind of make some primitive tools, and they've got this scenario about how we developed. All of a sudden, it appears that 4,400 years ago, all over the world, man suddenly became extremely sophisticated and intelligent. Because you look around the world, and you can see these very bright civilizations, like the Egyptians built the pyramids. When do these civilizations date back? None of them dates back any more than 4,000 years ago. I'm talking about the written history, the great archaeological sites. You look at the civilizations of Central America, North America, South America. You go and you look at the temples in Indonesia and Burma, and there was obvious great intelligence and engineering skill. I have been on islands out in the South Pacific. Any of you ever been to Ponape? Anyone here ever been to Ponape? We've got a mission work. Ponape. Did you go to Nanmadol, Dr. Baker? There's this place called Nanmadol that is a civilization. I think it's 50 acres, a temple that was built. They've got these basalt columns. Some of them weigh 50 tons. They don't know how they moved them. You ask the natives that live there today, and they'll say, we don't know how it was done. We didn't do it. They know that. But there was some civilization that built this extensive, it's called the Venice of the Pacific. And I've seen it. It's amazing, this civilization. They don't know. All over the world, there's these mysteries. This great intelligence seems to blossom. The oldest trees in the world, how old do you think they are? Well, it's not the redwoods and the sequoias. Some of them can be just about 4,000 years old. The oldest is the bristlecone pine found in our state. Oldest tree in the world. They got one called Methuselah. When they take a core sample, you know how old it dates? 4,300 years is the oldest one. There is no living thing on the planet, no tree beyond that time. Well, the Bible says that the whole world was covered and virtually scraped clean of anything living outside the ark 4,400 years ago. If you examine the evidence, it just really proves the Bible. You don't look at the Bible to arrive at your conclusion. If you look at the evidence, it substantiates what the Bible is teaching. The dating method, the history, and then what about people in the world, the population? Right now, this is my final point, there are approximately 6.3 billion people in the world today. You can do calculations and guess how many people will be in the world. Here's a chart. They're very concerned at the UN about the population growth. But look, it took, according to the evolutionists, it took, 3 million years for us to get the first billion people. That doesn't add up. In other words, if you look at the population growth of humans today and you analyze that backwards, it tells us that you would be reduced, and you factor in famines, you factor in catastrophe, you factor in plagues. It would reduce the human race to roughly a handful of people 4,400 years ago. The evolutionists know this. You know what they say? In order for humans not to be, we would be covering the planet if man has been here for 10,000 years, only 10,000 years, multiplying the way we do now, we would be covering the planet shoulder on top of shoulder, side by side, all over the planet right now. even counting for plagues. The only way evolutionists can account for the population of humans in the world today is to say, on several occasions through history, humans have been decimated, and then a small group of them managed to survive and repopulate. But they got to keep wiping us out, because based on current populations, we couldn't have been here the millions of years they say. And you know what is really creating a problem for the evolutionary teaching is DNA. DNA is an accurate science. Here's a map of the DNA tracking the flow of man around the world. I did not produce this map. It is not produced by religious groups. It is just a fact that the migration of humankind from around the world, they have found out, I hope I won't hurt anyone's feelings, the Native Americans did not come from the Jews as the Mormons want us to think. The Native Americans their DNA is very similar to that of the people in Mongolia and China, mostly Mongolia. You can tell where the migration came from. Isn't it interesting? See where that star is? In the vicinity of that star, they figure, is the cradle of civilization somewhere between Mesopotamia and the mountains of Ararat. Very interesting. Well, that's what my Bible says. So you can even look at this evidence. You know, the Bible tells us, as we said in our scripture reading, Acts 17, verse 26, and God has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth. And he's determined their pre-appointed times and their boundaries of their dwellings. We are all brothers and sisters. We're not only all related because of Adam and Eve, we are all related because of Noah. And then even more than that, we're all related because of Christ. Our world did not evolve by accident. It was designed and created by God. The Bible says in Hebrews 10, and you, Lord, in the beginning laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. Again, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Amen? I don't believe it happened by accident, friends. The more I study, the more the evidence you examine, you're really left with no other conclusion than there is a God that made us. There is a purpose to life. There is a purpose for your life. And part of that purpose is He wants to live and dwell with you through eternity. I'm hoping that it's your desire to believe that you do have a Heavenly Father. You have been made in His image. You did not evolve. It's the devil's idea to lower that standard and make us act like beasts. Another ad that was in Newsweek magazine showed monkeys on the cover and said, monkeys are not monogamous, so maybe we're not responsible for our infidelity. Can you see where this is coming from and where it's going, friends? This whole evolutionary religion is to undermine the teachings of truth that you find in the Bible. God is a creator. He made you in His image. He has a plan for your life.